Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the Raw Prospect Podcast. To my left, that's Michael Ween. I'm Emmy Nixon. But before we get into it, though, if you like what we do here, make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. All of our content is on the under the live section on our YouTube channel, and we're also live on Instagram and Twitch as well. If you don't want to be on YouTube. Um, Go check out all of our other content. We have a show called Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports, where we have Texas Longhorn sports content and other college football content as well. And check out our last football episode, our first episode of this football preview series, our 20 team and number 19 team. But now to introduce my co-host, Michael. How you doing, man?
I'm good. And to go along with Emmy's point, check out our first NFL episode. That was number 20, Indianapolis Colts, and number 19, Chicago Bears. Tonight will be numbers 18 and 17. And then our next NFL episode, most likely this weekend, will be numbers 16 and 15. And that will be the end of our kind of first tier of these rankings before we get into the next tier of teams, which we kind of explained on our last episode. Today, we will be discussing two teams. You probably know who they are by now if you're watching this. They are the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Atlanta Falcons. And so we are going to start with the Jacksonville Jaguars and their 2023 recap. Last year, the Jacksonville Jaguars finished in a technically tie for second with the Indianapolis Colts at 9-8 in the AFC South. They finished with a 4-2 divisional record in the AFC South. And Doug Peterson has mentioned it throughout the offseason in some of his press availabilities, but a second straight playoff berth for Jacksonville felt virtually assured for them after they started 8-3, but they collapsed near the end of the season, losing 5 of their last 6 games and ended up missing the playoffs. So they go from 8-3, and then they lose 5 of their last 6 to unfortunately miss the playoffs, which was a disappointment for them last year. So, Emmy, do you have anything else you want to add on to a recap for the Jaguars in 2023?
Yeah, well, just a couple things. They struggled to stop the run and they struggled to run the football. They were 23rd in stopping the run last year on defense, and I think they were 30th in rushing DVOA last season as well. So that played a big part in things, just their inefficiency when it comes to that. And they also couldn't really protect the passer to a large extent, which hindered their ability to throw the football deep down the field. And they addressed that this offseason, which we will get into here in a little bit.
And 2 more things I will add to that. More issues from last year. They struggled to finish drives. They crossed the 50-yard line 118 times last year and only scored on 56% of their drives with 36 touchdowns and 30 field goals. I think they got to be more productive finishing drives if they want to return to the playoffs, especially in the AFC. And then secondly, they had a negative turnover differential. The Jaguars had 30 turnovers, which was 5th most in the NFL, 14 interceptions, and 16 lost fumbles, compared to only 27 takeaways. Trevor Lawrence was responsible for 21 of those, including 7 lost fumbles. He's going to need to protect the ball better, but also they're going to need to bring those turnovers down. They want to have some more success. We'll get into all of that and more here coming up, but let's get into their 2024 offseason by giving you guys a list of our 3 favorite additions that they made. It could be via trade, it could be via signing, it could be even a coaching move that they made. Emmy, we'll start with you.
For me, I'm gonna start with uh their first round pick that they made, Brian Thomas Jr. I think this addresses the deep passing game that they struggled to find a connection with last season. And I also just think it's important to pair Trevor Lawrence with guys who fit his timeline. He's a young quarterback, and bringing in these veteran wide receivers through free agency is great, but only for the short term. I think Brian Thomas Jr. will be a Jaguar for the long term, and that matters. That's a long term partner that possibly could be with Trevor Lawrence for the next 5+ years, which is very very important. Um, and Yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'll let you uh, say your first one before I get into my next one.
Yeah, I cheated a little bit and I went with the combination of drafting Brian Thomas Jr., but also signing a guy like Gabe Davis in free agency for, I believe it was 3 years, $39 million with $24 million guaranteed. There are some potential issues that you could raise with the Gabe Davis signing, um, which I think is fair. But I just look at the kinds of players that Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr. are. They're similar in a lot of ways, but they're also kind of different. But they're both going to help in stretching the field vertically. And I think that's something that will pair well along with Christian Kirk, who hopefully is likely to be healthy after he missed the final 6 games with some kind of core abdominal injury last year, which I think in a lot of ways was a big part in them not playing as well down the stretch because he was a big part in their success early on. And so I think they have a strong receiving corps despite losing Calvin Ridley. I really like the signings of Gabe Davis as a free agent and Brian Thomas Jr. in the first round. Both are speed demons that can stretch the field that should fit well, I think, within this offense. I think
Right.
they're good fits with Trevor Lawrence as well. So I cheat a little bit and went with both receivers, but I think we pretty much agree on the premise that that should be included in the conversation here.
Right. And I actually like that you did that because those two moves are definitely connected. I think um, Gabe Davis is definitely just insurance for whether or not Brian Thomas Jr. will be ready to go and be the main deep threat from the jump. So Gabe Davis can be your guy, say weeks 1 through 5, and then Brian Thomas can kind of ease his way in and come into his own, which I think is definitely a move that I like. Um, Now, for my second and third favorite additions, they're both on the offensive line, so I'm just going to reveal them both at the same time. Um, my second was Mitch Morse, the center from Buffalo, and the other one was Brandon Scherf from Washington. So I think with Mitch Morse, he's just really, really solid. Actually, I would have to double check and make sure Brandon Scherf was a pickup this offseason. I don't have that in front of me, actually. I'll change it if it's not. But Mitch Morse, I know, is for sure. He's going to be a big loss for Buffalo, just in the fact that I think the center position is one that gets overlooked a little bit. I think he's very, very important to just being organized and picking up stunts, making reads on who's going to blitz, who's not, that type of stuff. And you're bringing in a veteran guy. You're paying about 10, 11, 12 million dollars, nothing too crazy, and I think that's well worth it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. Mitch Morse is absolutely a good signing. He's a definite, I think, upgrade over um, the center that they've had the past 2 years, whose name is Luke Fortner, who struggled the past couple of years. I think Jacksonville's kind of counting on their other four starters to stay healthy so that they can be more of a cohesive unit. And they'll have, I think, more a steady kind of revolving door now in Mitch Morse, who's a guy I know that my team, the Pittsburgh Steelers, potentially looked into as a veteran to bring in at the center position, and some other teams were definitely interested in. And he comes on a relative bargain for the kind of player that he is. I'm actually going from 3-1. So in my little list here, Brian Thomas Jr. and Gabe Davis were my third favorite addition, although I still really like it. My second might surprise some people. To I guess start this off, Jacksonville actually made a lot of changes in their secondary this offseason. They decided not to re-sign. Actually, they cut two starters. They cut Darius Williams and they cut Rayshawn Jenkins, and they did not renew the contract of free agent nickelback Trey Herndon. So they have some new pieces in the secondary, one of which they signed Darnell Savage, but one of which is Ronald Darby, who they signed. And he's my number 2 favorite addition. The reason why is because, I think he doesn't have necessarily the accolades or production of a Darius Williams, who we know is a very good player. But he is cheaper, and I think he might be a better pure fit for this new scheme that Ryan Nielsen is going to bring to the table, their new defensive coordinator, with this press man kind of scheme. I think he was one of the best possible options that the Jaguars had to replace him, and he comes at a bargain price. I mean, 2 years, $8.5 million, $5.5 million guaranteed is nothing for a guy who's been one of the most efficient press cornerbacks in football over the last couple of years. He had a terrific season last year with Baltimore. And while he might not bring a ton of upside due to his age and I guess lack of like ball hawking production, I think he's an ideal stopgap solution for this secondary, at least in the short term. Right. So I like that, kind of in the same sense that I like the Mitch Morse signing. And then my number 1 was I really liked bringing in Eric Armstead, who was kind of their signature move this offseason in free agency. The concern with the signing is obviously the injuries that he's dealt with the past 2 years, right? But I do think he's going to kind of be – the hope is that he's going to be the mainstay on the interior of this defensive front. That's going to be a new look defensive front. Under Ryan Nielsen, they're going to switch back to a lot of 4-man fronts with Josh Hines Allen. He did change his name, the signature edge rusher, and Trayvon Walker moving to more of like an edge 3 technique.
Right. Hand in the dirt.
On the outside. You put a guy like Eric Armstead, who I think has a very high floor when he's healthy and will bring you some production from a pass rush standpoint on the interior, who's familiar with this kind of scheme and will provide the team with some leadership qualities as well. I like it. It did come at a little bit of a price tag, but I think they needed to shore up that part of their roster. And so I like the move. So that's about – are there any other moves in free agency, the draft, that you want to bring up before we move on to the next part of this?
No, I think that covers it. Their draft was an interesting one. They had some moves that I didn't necessarily agree with a whole lot, but there definitely was a lot of good in it, and we'll get to it.
So instead of from here moving forward with our NFL episodes, instead of doing the 3 most important players, I just want to talk about the 3 like big. They could be players, but they can also be other factors. Let's call it
Yeah.
X
Storylines.
three X factors or storylines for the upcoming season.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, so we'll get into that part of the Jaguars preview now. Um, what is one thing that comes to mind immediately for you, whether it be a player, a coaching thing, a storyline, a quarterback thing for the Jaguars in order for them to have success in 2024?
Well, number one is the continued improvement of Trevor Lawrence. And that applies to ball security, that applies to efficiency in the red zone, even just little things like getting that extra level of uh, chemistry with his receivers. We saw like a few times last year, and some of those may not have been Trevor Lawrence's fault, but we saw a few times where he was throwing to his receivers down the sideline. They weren't able to connect for one reason or another, and it was very much just like one step here or there to the left or right, and it would have been a great play. But for one reason or another, they weren't able to connect, and that was a very consistent problem. So just the continued development of Trevor Lawrence, I think that's the thing that's tied the most to Doug Peterson's job. The fact that he's an offensive guy and their offense just was not as good as it should have been last season. Simple as that.
Yeah, that's the first thing that comes to mind for me as well. He kind of ran into the perfect storm last year. They got off to a really good start. He had taken the team to the playoffs in 2022, got them off to an 8-3 start last year, and then things kind of went off the rails. Now the team was hit with sort of a rash of injuries that factored into that. I mentioned the Christian Kirk one a little bit earlier, but every team deals with those factors in today's NFL, and so that's really no excuse, right? Now Lawrence did suffer, I think, a couple different injuries, and he missed practice um, and lost, I think, some playing time. But this, you're right. I mean, that's why they hired Doug Peterson. He's an offensive guy who's had success in other areas, on in other locations in the NFL. And I think for Trevor Lawrence, the big thing for me is just going to be game over game consistency and cutting down on some of the looseness with the football. I don't mind the interceptions at times. I like my quarterbacks to be not a reckless, but I like them to take risks. I don't mind an
Definitely.
interception here and there, right? Especially with maybe some of the improvements to your defense. Hopefully, those, as long as they're not interceptions in like key situations where you have to be smart with the football. I don't mind that every once in a while, but it's more so the fumbles, the lost fumbles that worry me more than the interceptions. You got to do a better job of taking care of the ball in the pocket when you get hit. Is I think something
Definitely.
he could work on. And then for Jacksonville as a whole, and I think this kind of goes into the whole operation. As I mentioned, you want to do a better drive and be more consistent, finishing off drives with touchdowns. Um, when you get not only across the 50, but into the red zone, that was an area that they struggled with last year. So I think that all ties together on the offensive side with the new pieces at receiver. All of it kind of mixes together to make one important thing for this upcoming season. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up was kind of the combination of Ryan Nielsen and switching to this new scheme with the 4-man line of scrimmage with Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker, right? Um, Playing more of an outside linebacker, um, and then slotting in Eric Armstead on the interior. Um, you also have guys like Devon Hamilton and Roy Robertson, who will be part of the rotation at the defensive tackle slot. Um, I'm interested to see how much that helps in the run game and in other aspects of their defense. And then Will's second round pick, Mason Smith, and fourth round pick, Jordan Jefferson. How much will those guys factor in to this equation on defense? I'm that's something I'm really watching. Jaguars defensively, especially on the defensive line.
Definitely. Yeah. I think, yeah, I mean, you nailed it right there. I think the defensive line definitely matters a whole ton. For me, I think I would definitely point to the offensive line. And
Yeah,
that's just in run blocking and pass blocking. I think this group was abysmal last year. Um, I think if they're able to run block at a decent clip, I think Travis Etienne is a very, very talented runner. To go along with Trevor Lawrence, who I think can do more in the running game as well and be a threat there and help the numbers advantage. Um, so I don't think there's any excuse for this group to be that far down in the rankings in terms of run game efficiency. And I think the changes they've made in terms of personnel will matter. And I think the continued improvement of some of their young guys will definitely play a part as well.
absolutely. One other thing before we get into kind of the outlook for Jacksonville going into this year. Um, they went 5-2 in their home games, not counting the London game that they pretty much play every year now. In 2022. Last year, though, they went 3-5 at home, and they fell at one game short of the playoffs. So I think playing better at home should be a major priority. I think you want to be at least 500, if not better, at home in the NFL, if you can.
Definitely.
And so that should be something that they try to improve upon. Um, Anything else before we get into 2024 outlook?
No, I think that's it.
So here's the question. I don't have the over under in front of me. Maybe I can look that up real fast. But what are your expectations for Jacksonville, and what will define a successful season for them? Do you think?
I think it'll just be important for them to keep pace in their division. Um,
Okay.
right now, it just feels like they've lost ground in those types of things, especially to the Texans. And obviously, with all the things that the Colts are doing as well, they're moving in a positive direction. Um, I think the team that we think that they can be is somewhere in there. Um, and when I say that, I mean like the team that we thought they could be last year. Like we thought this team, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I thought this team was poised to take that next step into the elite of the AFC. That didn't end up happening, but I think that could still happen if things go their way and they make the right changes. Um, actual expectations, though, I think around 10 wins would be successful. And I think you got to be able to win some tough division games because we know the Colts matchups and the Texans matchups are going to be a battle.
Yeah. I can't actually remember exactly what I said last year in the Jaguars, but I think it was somewhere along those lines. Um, I look at their schedule. Look, in the NFL, you want to get off to a good start. You'd rather get off to a good start than a bad start. So, whatever I'm about to say is not rocket science, but there is a little intricacy to this. 1, 2, 3, 4, Their first 5 games are all AFC games. Two of which are those big divisional opponents you talked about, Houston and Indianapolis. It's at Miami, Cleveland at home, at Buffalo, at Houston, and then Indianapolis before they go to
Wow.
London for 2 games against Chicago and New England. Chicago should be a much improved team, like we discussed last episode. So you don't want to get off to a bad start, not just because you never want to get off to a bad start, but you're playing a lot of your AFC counterparts that will be similar to you, hopefully, fighting for at least wild card positioning. And then you have, of course, your division opponents who you're trying to beat out for your division. So a good start is especially important this year for Jacksonville. They got off to a good start last year. They've been pretty good about that. But I think it'll come especially important this year.
Definitely.
I look at their schedule. I think 10 wins is about realistic if they can improve upon some of the things, just some of the little things that we talked about. Trevor Lawrence taking better care of the football, playing more consistent, which we still are hoping to see. He's gotten better, obviously, for the last couple of years. I think the receiving additions, maybe in the cumulative, will work out and maybe even make this offense a little better. I like what Travis Etienne has done at the running back position. I like some of the additions they made defensively. I'm starting to believe in Ryan Nielsen as kind of the defensive coordinator hire. A lot of these things come together, and I think 10 wins, maybe a wild card spot. I mean, 10 wins in the AFC doesn't guarantee you anything, really, in terms of the playoffs. You'll be in the mix, but as deep as the AFC is, with what, maybe one or two teams that we would say really probably don't have a chance, that doesn't guarantee you anything, but you at least have to put yourself in the position. I think they'll be around that area. So that's pretty much it on Jacksonville. Do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's it. That was pretty efficient. 30 minutes about for that first team. And now we get into our second team, the Atlanta Falcons. I'll just get straight into this. In terms of the 2023 outlook, this was a case study on what happens to a talented NFL team when they don't have the right quarterback and the right head coach. Pretty much. They ended up, what was it, 6-11, 7-10, something like that. And in reality, if they had those two things right, which we think they do now, then they should have been in the playoffs and possibly competing. Like they had a really good team. They really did.
Yeah.
So it is very disappointing, I'm sure, for Falcons fans in particular. But what did you take from last season's Falcons?
Well, they were 7-10. They finished 3-3 in their division. They fired Arthur Smith after 3 straight 7-10 seasons. So the thing really wasn't going anywhere. It was just kind of the same thing again and again and again. Maybe a little different ways in getting there in the end, but that was kind of it.
Yeah.
Look, in the NFL, when you don't have the right coach and you don't have necessarily the right quarterback either, it's really hard to do even what the Falcons have been doing the past couple of years and remaining as competitive as they have been. I think the fact that their division is kind of viewed as one of the weaker divisions in football helps a little bit, certainly. But I do think going into this year, just the fact that they have a quarterback now, which we'll absolutely talk about, and they, I think, figured out a really nice coaching staff. They put together a really nice staff under new head coach Raheem Morris. That should count for probably 2 or 3 wins in and of itself, in my opinion. I haven't looked at their schedule yet, but I think Zach Robinson coming in. Well, I'll save that for our next little segment here. But I mean, really, it's just simple as that. Like you don't have the right pieces in place at the higher up positions within your organization. It's going to be hard, and so that's really it. I do look for this team to take a pretty significant leap this year. I'm actually pretty high on this Falcons team going into this year.
I am as well. Okay. Yeah. Now we can get into our three favorite signings of the offseason. I'm assuming we're going to have quite a bit of overlap here. First and foremost, let's just have an open discussion here. I'm assuming you have Kirk Cousins on your list.
Yeah, has to
Okay.
be.
Yeah. So, uh, where do you want to take this? Like, what do
Well,
you think Kirk Cousins is going to bring? I don't know.
I mean, I guess what's kind of like the main knock on Kirk Cousins. What has been the main knock on Cousins? In my opinion, it's kind of been um, the fact that he's kind of a well. First of all, he's a I don't know we all know about the primetime stuff. That's been part of it for the longest time,
Right.
and the fact that before going into the 2022 season, he was 59-59 as a starter, and he's 1-3 in the playoffs. But he does have that signature playoff win. I believe it was at Minnesota.
Right.
In terms of what he's going to bring, um, he signed a 4-year deal up a deal worth up to $180 million. They also drafted Michael Penix Jr., which at the time was ridiculed for a lot of different reasons, but they have him in the fold. He's signed for 4 years, $22.6 million. He's coming off an Achilles injury, which is absolutely a storyline. I think he's just going to provide stable quarterback play after what was a short-lived and turnover-filled stint with Desmond Ritter.
Yeah.
I think Cousins is considered a better fit for this new offense that they're going to run under Zach Robinson, who comes from the Sean McVay tree, because Cousins played his last 2 seasons for Kevin O'Connell, who also came from the same coaching tree. So I believe this system will be familiar to him. It's based off timing, throwing the ball quickly and accurately to your receivers. The Falcons have the weapons and they have the run game to support an older quarterback who's coming off a major injury. And they have, I think, the offensive line to protect him as well. I do think it's a really good fit. People can talk about the money, whether or not it's an overpay all you want. That's what the market demands for a top 10-ish, 12-ish quarterback in today's league. He will get them to the playoffs. I'm a firm believer in that. At the very least, provide stability at that position for the next 2 years. Because remember, I believe that they heavily front-loaded this contract so that it will make it easier for them to potentially get out of it if they want, maybe going into year 3 or year 4, if at that point it's not working out. But for the next 1 to 2 years, I believe that Kirk Cousins is going to do a lot in helping the Falcons win a lot of football games.
Exactly. I think Kirk Cousins is a fringe top 10 quarterback.
I would
I
agree.
really do believe that. I mean, he's tough as shit. He will sit in the pocket and take a hit, man. And you need a quarterback that's going to be able to do that, man. And that's why this isn't. I don't want to hate on Derek Carr, but that's why this isn't the Derek Carr signing. It's because Kirk Cousins has raised his game to the next level by just being willing and able to stand in there in the pocket for that extra count and take those shots and deliver the ball accurately and on time. I think that's his best quality as a quarterback. And I think I'm really excited to watch how this offense operates. It's a really good offensive line. I think they're going to run a lot of wide zone, kind of what they were doing in those early years with Sean McVay. And I'm just imagining Kyle Pitts and Drake London in the quote unquote Cooper Cup role, running those type of routes, crossing routes. And I think I see it really, really working, man. I think this offense is going to be really, really good.
Yeah. I'll just go ahead and give my next couple additions
Yeah.
that I liked. I said it at the beginning. I think Zach Robinson is a very important addition to the coaching staff under Raheem Morris. Look, to make a hire like Raheem Morris, who's going to be a defensive minded guy, I think these defensive coaches in today's NFL, it's not that they can't win Super Bowls or be successful if they have the right quarterback in place. But I think it's important for these defensive coaches to hire the right people, especially at the offensive coordinator position. And I do
Yep.
believe that I just believe generally in the Sean McVay tree. Um, and I think Zach Robinson and kind of the familiarity that I mentioned earlier between Kevin O'Connell, Zach Robinson, and Sean McVay, Kirk Cousins, all of those guys should help this offense. Um, I think getting a guy like um, Dwayne Ledford, who's been named their run game coordinator, um, it's getting guys like that on this offensive staff are going to, I think, pay some big time dividends. And then I did like the move that they made, and I think it was trading um, for Rondale Moore, who's kind of a speedster type that they can add to this receiving corps, along with, I guess, signing Darnell Mooney. Those are two guys that I think will will be good in this receiving room next to Drake London. So those were my favorite additions for the Falcons. I
Yeah,
don't know.
I had Zach Robinson in my number 3 spot. And the only thing that I'll add on to all your points there is, I think he's going to allow, I guess, along with the signings of Darnell Mooney and more, it's going to allow Kyle Pitts to be in that short to intermediate passing game. Kyle Pitts has been their deep threat the last couple of years, and it's
Yeah,
um, he's kind of been their most explosive receiving threat, and used in that way. And that's what's been causing some of those underwhelming numbers based on what his talent is. And I think um, this is going to allow Kyle Pitts to be utilized in a much better way. Um, and I also think Zach Robinson, he was in very high demand. The Bears were looking at him, and I think the Steelers gave him a look as well, if I'm not mistaken.
who?
Zach Robinson.
Yeah, they did. He got an interview. Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Um,
I would assume that he's going to be a head coach here at some point in the next few years. Okay, so my second spot, I actually had Michael Penix Jr. here, and
okay.
I kind of wanted to defend the pick, and I also wanted to kind of open up the discussion after I make a few of these points. So I was listening to the Bootleg Football podcast, and they brought out kind of a new perspective that I hadn't thought about before. And their main point was with kind of the Falcons draft room's thought process was that these scouts have their evaluations done a year ahead of time. So they have their quarterbacks done, their quarterback evaluations for the 2025 draft class already done. And obviously things can change with how players play this season, but in their mind, they saw the 24-24 draft class as a better time to secure their future at quarterback than in the 2025 class. And I think weighing their options between going edge rusher or corner in this year's class versus doing it next year, I think things start to make a little bit more sense. The second point they made was that the NFL had reportedly looked into the Falcons for possibly tampering while signing Kirk Cousins. So by picking Michael Penix, if Kirk Cousins were to be suspended for the not this season, but the year after, 2025 season. Wait. Yeah, 2025 season, then you would have Michael Penix Jr. in that spot. So I think that definitely makes the pick seem a lot more reasonable with that information.
Yeah, and also you make. I think a lot of the reason the pick got so much flack was because you just signed Kirk Cousins to that 4-year, $100 million, $80 investment, and then you turn back around and you pick a quarterback. But at the same time, like maybe not a lot of people were thinking about this at the time when you sign Kirk Cousins and make that kind of like win now move. When you're already kind of on the fringe of being in the playoffs and potentially winning 10 games and being at the top of your division, you're not going to be in that same kind of premier position to draft one of the top quarterbacks, presumably in an upcoming draft, whether
Right.
it's next year or the year after. So why not just go ahead and get that guy now in case things don't go the way you want with Kirk Cousins?
Right.
And I think it's a great situation for Penix. You have the weapons in place. You have a good offensive coordinator, and you have a veteran who's been through the ringer himself in Kirk Cousins to get where he is today with the start
As
in
a pocket
Washington.
passer, they're kind of the same
And,
style.
exactly. And if anybody has a lot of respect for Michael Penix Jr., it's us because we watched some college football and we saw what he did to Texas
Yes. Oh my
uh,
God.
in the Sugar
Oh,
Bowl with the performance of his
ugh,
life.
making me
Um,
shiver.
and we know to certain extents, but we both know how many injuries and that guy's been through.
Right.
So I think it's a great situation. Looking back on the pick, I think there are reasons to think it wasn't as bad as some people make it out to be. And I think it's great you brought that up. So I guess that can just open up the discussion to the X Factor storyline discussions that we want to have with the
Yeah.
Falcons. Where do we want to go first? We kind of talked about Kirk Cousins. Is there anything else you want to address from a quarterback standpoint, or is there something else here?
Um. Well, not really from a quarterback standpoint, but I do think now that you've made all these moves and you've kind of gone into this win now window, um, now you got to win the division. That's the bare minimum.
Yeah,
I think you also should be able to win 10 games with
yeah,
your schedule. Four of the wait, three of the teams you play, so six of your games are against the NFC South. And credit to the Bucks, they made the division round last year. They're a frisky team, but I think this Falcons team is better. I really do believe that. So
yeah.
um,
Yes.
they need to
With
take
Kirk,
advantage of this window, and
mhm.
anything less than that is a huge disappointment.
With Kirk Cousins, they are a better team than the Falcons. Or
Than the Bucks.
Yes,
We know
with
what you
Kirk
meant.
Cousins, they are a better team than the Bucks. With those other quarterbacks, not to be disrespectful, but they weren't a better team than the Bucks, especially last year with the year that Baker Mayfield had. And what I will say is, don't completely sleep on Tampa Bay. Um, those division games are never. There's always a division game or two every year where it's not an easy game. Um,
Definitely.
in some divisions, all six are not easy games.
Yeah.
Um, but I think not to necessarily be disrespectful to the other teams in the division, but you have the best quarterback in the division now. You have a really nice roster, and that should be the bare minimum. And if you win your division, that gives you a home playoff game, which also would be nice for the Falcons. A couple of things I'm looking at. Number one, this running game just fascinates me with Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson. Um, some people, I think, especially fantasy owners, at some points last year got frustrated with the way they were using Bijan. Uh, does that change? How much does that change?
Along with Texas
Yeah,
fans as well.
uh-huh, absolutely. Um, and we kind of fold into both of those buckets. Um, I'm sure that's going to change. Like, could Bijan turn into what I hope he turns into, which is like a top 5 back in the league, which I'm rooting for. That's more of a personal interest, more so than I think it may be a storyline. But
Right.
there's
It
that.
definitely does matter for sure. I think
Absolutely.
my prediction is that he'll get a large brunt of the cherries. And, Tyler Algier is a talented back, and he'll come in here and there to give Bijan Robinson some rest. But, you draft Bijan Robinson with the eighth overall pick, you do it to run him into the ground. Whether you use him a fuck ton or not, he's still going to age like a running back. So just holding him on the sideline does nothing. So I just, it was really frustrating to watch last year, seeing them do that. It just blew my mind, man. Because when he was in the game, he was electric.
Yeah. The next couple things I'll mention, then I'll kind of stop. Um, Number one is this defensive front, particularly in pass rush situations,
Yep.
is what I'm watching for. Did you know that the Falcons have not had a player to get double-digit sacks since Vic Beasley did it back in 2016?
Wow. It's a
Um,
long time.
it's
Almost 10 years.
now, yeah, and that was the year that they made their way to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Funny enough. So I think for the Falcons, it's been more of kind of a group effort for them in pass rush situations in years past. They did have 42 sacks last year, and I think there are some questions on this defensive front still. Grady Jarrett, who, to his credit, is a very good player and a two-time Pro Bowler. He's expected to be back from knee surgery to help bolster this unit. And expectations are high for one of their second-year defensive linemen, Zach Harrison. They also got David Onyemata, who's
Mhm.
returning for his second season with the team, and they drafted and injected some youth into this front with a couple guys in this year's draft that could add some youthful power up front. But I still have, I guess, not necessarily doubt, but how productive in pass rushing situations can this front be? How disruptive can they be? How much can they help out a secondary that, by the way, is already very good with AJ Terrell and Jesse Bates and the guys they have back there. So I think that defensive line is interesting. They got a lot of new young youth injected there. They have a really good player coming back off of injury, and then some second year guys who they're looking to take steps do those guys actually take those steps? It sounds cliche,
Right.
but I think it will be important for them.
Right. Yeah, they have some young guys that they're hoping will step up as well.
Yep.
Braylon Trice is someone I find interesting.
Yeah.
Ruka
Yep.
Rororo. Um, that's a fun name to
Yep.
say. Second round pick this past year. Um, Brandon Dorless, their fourth round pick. So that
Yep.
defensive line is very young, and those names I mentioned, they're not even the name I'm looking at the most. The name I'm looking at the most is probably Arnold Ebiketie, their second round pick from 2022. I think he could be in for a much better season heading into this year. The other thing I wanted to mention is they very much upgraded. I could have said that better. They upgraded the opposite corner position to AJ Terrell immensely. Um, they replaced Jeff Okuda, who had a really tough year last year,
Yep.
with Clark Phillips III,
Yep.
who I think they required. Uh, I can't remember
Let's
who
see.
they acquired him from, but he's a very solid player, and I think he's going to provide a little bit of stability on the back end for them. Um, and he won't be attacked as much as Jeff Okuda was last year.
Yeah, Clark Phillips being a second year guy out of the University of Utah, high pedigree kind of guy. He'll go along with AJ Terrell, and then they have Jesse Bates at safety along with DeMarco Helms, a second year guy out of Alabama. There's some youth in this defense. And the interesting thing about the defense, too, is we know Raheem Morris is a defensive guy, but he brought one of his guys from the Rams with him in Jimmy Lake, who's going to be the coordinator of this defense. So I just think generally when you have not just one new coordinator, but two new coordinators, that's always a storyline going into the season. So how much can Raheem Morris and Jimmy Lake extract out of parts of this defense, the younger players, will be
Right.
important. But I think the pieces overall are in place from the quarterback to the hopefully the coach. I think Raheem Morris is going to work out the second time around as an NFL head coach, with the infrastructure that's already in place, with this offensive line, with these running backs, with now the quarterback who's been there and done that pretty much. Um, and a defense that has nice pieces will just need a couple guys to step up, but can be solid. The minimum expectation is win your division and host a playoff game and then go from there. That's it for the Falcons, I think.
Right. I
I
agree.
mean,
I 100%
do,
agree.
do we get to see uh do we potentially get to see Michael Penix at some point? Because they also have, I believe, Taylor Heineke in the quarterback room as well. And so we'll see how that works out. If
Yeah.
not that it would happen, hopefully it doesn't. But if we did have to see a quarterback other than Kirk Cousins, who would that be? Would it be the guy that they drafted eighth, or would they wait? Do they want him to maybe sit this year, and that's why they have Taylor Heineke? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see why they would want him to sit. I mean, I think he's just as about as NFL ready as you can be, in my
Yeah,
opinion. So that'll be interesting for sure. I'll also just I'm gonna keep a really close eye on their preseason games. I hope they don't get scared and get scared of Michael Penix playing too good in the preseason just because they don't want the media storm. Like I hope they let him play entire halves of football. Like I really hope they'll do that.
yeah, I would agree with that. Um, I think that's it. Is that it for you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's it for me.
All right, you sign us off.
Yeah. So until next time, that's Michael Ween. I'm Amy Nixon. Um, if you're still here, make sure you like the video and you're subscribed to our YouTube channel. We're going to continue to move along in this series. And if you like the changes that we made today with our X Factor storyline segment, leave that down in the comment section and leave your predictions for who you think will be in the 16 and 15 slots as well.
Yeah. Don't take any hints from the shirt that I'm wearing, but go about those guesses as you may. And so until next time, as Emmy mentioned, we'll see you this weekend. Peace out.